This video is just how I would shape doors out to be as of right now, and I don't mean any insult to the game now. I love the game, I just want to show my own spin on it. Don't hate me for doing or saying things you don't agree with. With that, let's actually get into it. Roblox Doors is an indie game that has risen from the ashes of the horrible indie games nowadays, and has become one of the best indie games right now. We won't get into the debate if it's an indie game right now. It is, by the way. If you haven't seen my video on that, go watch it. The link will be in the description. In this video, I want to explain how I would have handled Doors if I was its creator. Speaking of the creators, I'm going to link their Twitters down below if you want to go see them, and I'll link their YouTube as well. Like story, gameplay, and other stuff, I'm going to be changing that, mostly. Mostly, like, the story, though, because Doors doesn't really have a story right now. Don't flame me in the comments if I say something you don't like. Remember, I love this game and its creators, so please don't harass me. Alright, let's do it. Let's get the biggest part out of the way, the story. Doors as of right now doesn't have much story, but there is some hidden details, as the devs and MatPat mentioned. But as of right now, I'm going to be disregarding that. I think the story would go a little something like this in my head. It's the 1950s. A hotel was being built in a big town. The owner, who we'll just call Smith, was an entrepreneur who was into the business of housing and real estate, stuff like that. He ended up building this hotel in a big city, which we'll call Crucifella, because he knew many people would be there, so he can build an even bigger hotel. And the bigger the hotel, the more people, the more cash. He was a little greedy. Everything went well for a while, until one day, the money was getting to Smith's head. He had big plans for the place. He ended up integrating a hospital inside, and this hospital would end up being his downfall. But we're not there yet. So, injured people could go there, not just for treatment, but also living. 2 in 1. He had discovered a way to get even more people in. Soon he had all the tourists coming to the hotel. It was the only one people would go to in that city. It's all he ever wanted. That money. But Smith didn't always have the chance to do things like this. As a child, he lived in Spain. He had barely any opportunities there. His mom disapproved of the housing and business, but he would show her. When he got a job, he saved his money up for a one-way ticket to the U.S. He didn't turn back. He left in secret and never came back. He ended up in Utah, in the city of Crucifella. Obviously, I don't think that's a real place. Don't search it up. This was the only city that wasn't recovering from the Great Depression. Utah was one of the fourth, most hit by the Great Depression, by the way, so it was surprising to see a city that wasn't. Guess he got lucky. He got his job and started learning more and more about not just real estate, but also marketing. Because if building failed, he could always go into marketing. But if the building didn't fail, he could market the heck out of the hotel. Now, back with Smith in the 1960s. He had a girlfriend, and his business started to slow as the winter was just starting. Less and less people were coming in, mostly because a lot of people weren't traveling for the winter, and the majority of them are injured people. So, not even people without injuries are coming into the hotel, just injured people usually taking advantage of living and being able to get treatment for their injuries. Smith was in the hospital area, and he heard a doctor talking to a patient. The patient was a scientist, a famous one too, who had been working in building things and even somewhat people from scratch, sort of like creatures or monsters, like robots. He had worked with a few businesses and made them basically robots as mascots, but there was one thing different about them. They weren't robots. They were like real creatures. This man was able to make beings out of nothing. Smith got an idea. Back when he was marketing, found out that mascots would be very good. What if he had hotel mascots? It was perfect. Smith asked the guy about his projects and offered him money to help him. This man's name was Henry, but as time went on, something didn't seem right. It's almost 15 years later, and Smith was only now realizing something was up. And Henry barely talked to him, only when he wanted money for funding for his projects. Yet as time went on, projects never came and the money started to go. Smith was annoyed now, very annoyed. Smith finally confronted Henry about it, but Henry was not having it. He went on to attack Smith, trapping him in some sort of tube where no one could find him in the hotel. The news spread. Smith's disappearance gave the hotel a bad rep, so more and more people stopped going. Even when the winter passed, sooner than later, the place was abandoned. Mostly, someone remained. Henry. and technically Smith, but he was trapped. He used the place as some sort of lab. He had stationed himself at door 60, trying to create more and more of his creatures. It was a bit harder now that people weren't coming, and he couldn't really use that amount of subjects. But he decided his first subject would be Smith. He had kept him trapped for long enough. Henry had a simple way of creating these creatures. It was like building an AI. He could take their simple character traits and put them into some chemicals, and boom, they were monsters. But this time, he wasn't just taking their characteristics. He was taking an actual full human being. He had Smith trapped in some sort of huge test tube to keep him from escaping. He would feed him, of course, and give him water to keep him alive, but barely. Smith was hanging on by a thread. Smith was reconsidering all his life choices. This went on for years upon years. He was wondering if it was his fault he was going to meet this fate or not. He was so desperate for money back in Spain. He was so greedy, and he left without telling anyone. He eavesdropped on someone's conversation and ended up getting himself trapped here. On the other hand, he never could have predicted the twisted ways of this man. Suddenly, Smith had a realization. All the creatures this guy had made, they were indeed once human, but it wasn't fully. It was enough to give these creatures life, but enough to keep its human counterpart alive. Henry finally ended up filling the tube with some sort of chemical, trapping Smith. When the tube finally drained, nothing remained. No one was in there, but something was off. The tube top was open, but there was no doubt. Someone had just opened it and ran off. The transformation must have worked. It had to have worked. He was in the tube for at least 5 minutes before escaping. The tube top was on the ground, and the liquid hadn't dried, meaning they had just escaped. After years went by, people came by, trying to find the mysteries of this hotel. All of them ambushed by the monster that was Henry. One by one, people went missing. But finally, Henry was outsmarted by one of his own creations. All the creations he made over the years stalked the hotel, wanting revenge for what he had done to them. But at the same time, they couldn't remember their true lives. Even if they did get their revenge, what would they be going back to? The truth was, the only thing they remembered was that Henry converted them to these monsters, not their real lives before it. Henry made a hideout in the hotel. It was a small room around door 60. He never wanted to go further than that, due to the fact that any one of his monsters could be out there. He hadn't been out there for weeks at that point. He was running low on his supply of food and water. What would he do? He needed to go out. Instead of going forward through the doors, he went back. He didn't want to run into anything ahead. Only problem with that is, the hotel hospital was ahead, but he didn't want to go there because he didn't want any of the monsters to find him. As he walked, he was suddenly attacked from behind and knocked out. When he woke up, he was back in his little lab at door 60, but not like normal. He was in a tube. Suddenly it started to fill with the liquid that he used to use to trap the monsters, or the test subjects that turned into the monsters. He was being turned on, but by who? Who could do this? He didn't know, but he wanted out. He tried and tried to break down the glass, but he couldn't escape. Before he was taken over by the liquid, he yelled out that he would get his revenge. The last thing he saw was a shadow of someone small. 5 years passed. The hotel wasn't taken down only because of how much people it brought into the city. It was like an attraction, but no one was allowed in, until whoever you play as indoors comes along with a few friends. Because the game is usually surrounding 4 players. There's always at least 4 closets in a room. Since they were kids, they've always heard spooky rumors of dark stuff happening in that place, but never believed them. For a practical joke, the friends entered the hotel to record it and show it to their other friends, but little did they know, they would come across what could possibly be their last trip ever. And before we continue, let's clarify some things. The time the main characters show up is around the 1980s, which is obvious because they have a camera that actually works. So that would mean Smith has his hotel running for about 15 years before turning into a monster. 5 years later is when the main characters show up. Another thing is that El Goblino is the one who trapped Henry in the tube. And on that topic, I'll be pointing out that Smith is turned into El Goblino, simply because of his characteristics. Smith back in Spain always felt small, and like he had nothing going for him, which is why he's physically small as a goblin. His love for money also shows in his habit to steal money from people in the hotel. His final trait is what he tells the player. Lines like, "My earring? It was given to me by Mia Moore, dude. I'll see her again one day." And that refers to his girlfriend he got around the winter of 1960s. Or, "Oi, stay away, far away from room 60, dude." freaky stuff. That refers to when he was trapped by Henry and also trapped Henry himself. One more thing I want to go over is gameplay. There's not much I would change, but I do want to change something. Door 50, the library. I love Door 50 in figure, but I want it to be harder. It's pretty easy. How it is now, it's possible a first-time player could beat it in first try. I know from experience because my cousin did just that. Then again, it may just depend on the player. To increase the difficulty, I would add in the factor that to unlock the door, instead of just one room in the library, there's at least one other room with another puzzle to get at least 3 of the last books, maybe 2. To get in, you would need a key in one of the drawers of door 50 and 49. The door before room 50 would also be left open. Like, the door usually closes when you enter door 50, but it would stay open since there's drawers in there and it can be used. Also, rewarding lucky players who loot the key before entering. Sort of like the breaker parts in door 100, as you can collect some of them in the beginning before you actually start. As of the other rooms, I'd add in more lore, like being able to open the letters in drawers and maybe being able to see the typewriters. I would amp up the chance to get other entities too, like Halt or Jack. I'd also add back some of the removed rooms, such as the one where you search for the lever in a mini library and the L-shaped vent rooms. I would also want to add in some rooms with more space for fun challenges like the no hiding challenge. That's all I can think of for this video, but if you have any suggestions or ideas, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.